What would you do if the love of your life turned out to be hiding a devastating secret? Alara thought she had the perfect partner, the perfect neighbor, and the perfect future until one quiet evening shattered her world. This is the story of betrayal, heartbreak, and the strength it takes to reclaim your life. Stay tuned as we unravel the chilling truth behind the facade. Alara stood on her front porch, gazing at the breathtaking sunset that bathed the suburban skyline in vivid hues of pink and orange. Her curly chestnut hair danced gently in the breeze, framing a face deep in thought. Clutched against her chest was her ever-present sketchpad, a symbol of her passion and purpose. For Alara, art wasn't just a pastime. It was her soul made visible, a means of transforming the ordinary into the extraordinary. Whether painting tranquil landscapes or crafting intricate wedding decorations, her creativity defined her. And now, all that talent and energy was focused on the most significant event of her life, her wedding to Kane. The neighborhood admired Alara and Kane. They seemed like the couple from a romantic film, effortlessly charming, with smiles that lit up every room and a bond that made people believe in soulmates. Alara, warm-hearted and endlessly kind, was the community's cornerstone, always ready with a thoughtful gesture or a handmade gift. Kane, in contrast, was ambitious and magnetic, a rising star in the business world with a sharp mind and infectious energy. Together, they were a blend of passion and precision. Their love story began 3 years earlier at a charity art auction. Alara had nervously adjusted her glasses as she showcased her work, uncertain how it would be received. Among the crowd of potential buyers, Kane stood out, exuding confidence in a tailored suit. He approached her booth with a cheeky grin and purchased one of her paintings, saying, "You've got talent, but I think I'm even more impressed by how adorably shy you are." That single moment set their whirlwind romance in motion. Now, weeks away from their wedding, Alara's modest home buzzed with anticipation. Invitations were mailed, floral arrangements ordered, and her mother's dining room table was a chaotic yet beautiful mess of fabric swatches and color samples for the reception. "Alara, have you looked at the tablecloth samples yet?" her mom called from the kitchen. "Coming, Mom," Alara replied, carefully setting her sketchpad on the couch. Her mom handed her a small stack of fabrics, her smile warm and proud. "You and Kane are going to have the most beautiful wedding anyone's ever seen. Everyone's talking about it." Alara's cheeks flushed. "I just want it to feel special, something we'll remember forever." Her mom nodded knowingly. "With a man like Kane, I'm sure it will be perfect." Later that evening, the hum of Kane's sleek car pulling into the driveway sent a familiar flutter through Alara's heart. His arrival always had that effect on her, even after all this time. He stepped through the door, tall and self-assured, his dark hair slightly tousled by the wind. His smile lit up the room. "Where's my bride-to-be?" he called, his hazel eyes sparkling with mischief. "In here," Alara answered, poking her head out from the dining room. In a few quick strides, Kane reached her and wrapped her in a warm embrace. "How's my favorite artist doing?" he asked playfully. "Busy making sure our wedding doesn't fall apart," she teased, holding up a swatch of fabric. "Do you prefer ivory or cream?" Kane rubbed his chin in mock deliberation. Whichever one makes you happy, my love. I trust your vision." Alara laughed, shaking her head. "You're no help at all." The two spent the evening immersed in wedding plans, their conversation flowing effortlessly from the guest list to the reception playlist. Kane's knack for turning mundane tasks into joyful moments made even the most stressful planning enjoyable. "What do you think about adding a live band?" he suggested, spinning a pen between his fingers. "Something jazzy to get everyone on their feet." "That's a great idea," Alara agreed. "You always know how to bring excitement into the room." As the hours slipped away, Alara felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This was the life she had always dreamed of, a partner who cherished her passions, encouraged her creativity, and brought adventure into every moment. Their neighbors often remarked on how perfectly matched they were. At barbecues and community events, people would stop to ask about their wedding plans, eager to share in their happiness. Mrs. Howell, the elderly woman next door, once told Alara, "You two are like a storybook couple. It's as if you're meant to be together." Alara always smiled at such remarks because she believed them to be true. The neighborhood's excitement for their upcoming nuptials was palpable. The ceremony was set to take place in the lush gardens of a historic mansion nearby, and nearly everyone was invited. The Millers, who lived down the street, had even offered their vintage car for Alara's grand entrance. Late one night, after a long day of planning, Alara found herself sitting quietly, reflecting on how everything had come together so beautifully. Yet, beneath the surface of her joy, an unspoken tension lingered, a faint but growing shadow that neither she nor Kane could have anticipated. By the window, sketchpad in hand, Alara was immersed in a drawing of their wedding venue. She imagined the fairy lights strung elegantly overhead and the flowers blooming in vivid colors, bringing her vision to life. Lost in her creative flow, she barely noticed Kane enter the room. Quietly, he placed 2 steaming mugs of tea on the table and sat beside her on the couch. "Still working?" he asked, glancing at her sketch. "Just trying to picture everything," she replied with a soft smile, her pencil pausing for a moment. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You're incredible. You know that." Alara leaned into him, feeling a warmth that went beyond the tea. "I just want it to be perfect," she whispered. "It will be," he said with quiet confidence, "because we're in this together." That night, as Alara closed her sketchbook, she felt like the luckiest woman in the world. A fiancé who adored her, a community that cherished her, and a future that seemed as luminous as the stars outside her window. But life, as she would soon discover, rarely conforms to our most hopeful sketches. Beneath the surface of their picture-perfect life, a storm was quietly brewing, one that would redefine everything she thought she knew about love and trust. The days leading up to the wedding were meant to be thrilling, filled with anticipation and joy. Instead, for Alara, they were tinged with unease. At first, she dismissed it as the natural stress of planning such a monumental event, but the feeling gnawed at her, growing stronger each time Kane hurried out the door for another work meeting. "I'm swamped with meetings," he would say when she asked about his packed schedule. "This new project is huge, and the timing couldn't be worse." Alara wanted to believe him. She knew how much his career meant to him and didn't want to become a fiancé who questioned every little thing. But something about the way he spoke, the lack of eye contact, the clipped tone felt off. His presence in her life was steady, but now it felt distant, as though his mind was elsewhere even when he was sitting beside her. One night, as Alara sorted through seating charts in the living room, Kane's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen, his expression unreadable, before quickly picking it up. "I'll take this outside," he said casually, already heading toward the back porch. Alara paused, pen in hand, and watched him go. A nervous flutter stirred in her chest. Who was calling him so late? Through the glass door, she could hear the muffled cadence of his voice, but not the words. When he returned, his face was calm. Too calm, she thought. "Everything okay?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. "Yeah, just work stuff," he replied, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Don't worry about it." She nodded, forcing a smile, but couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The phone calls became more frequent after that. They came during dinner, interrupting their rare moments together, or late at night when she was already in bed. "I've got to take this," he would mutter, stepping out of the room. Each time, he returned with the same overly composed demeanor, as if he had rehearsed his lines. Alara tried to convince herself it was nothing. "It's just wedding stress," she told herself, "and his job is demanding." But the excuses were beginning to feel as thin as the paper of her sketchpad. And there were the late nights. Kane had always worked long hours, but recently he was coming home even later. "We're finalizing a big deal," he explained one evening, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. "It's just bad timing with the wedding so close." Alara gave him a tired smile. "I get it," she said, though deep down she didn't. She missed him. Dinner, once their time to reconnect and share stories, had become a lonely ritual. More often than not, she found herself sitting alone at the table, staring at his empty chair and wondering where he really was. The doubts, once faint whispers, were now a persistent echo in her mind. And yet, Alara wasn't ready to confront them. Not yet. Not when she still wanted so desperately to believe in the life they had promised each other. When Kane was home, it didn't feel the same. His presence, once comforting, now felt distant. His attention was glued to his phone or laptop, and their conversations had become hollow. When Alara asked about his day, his answers were curt, fine, or busy. Before he quickly shifted the topic, the easy, natural flow of their dialogue had turned into a struggle, like climbing a steep hill. One evening, as they sat on the couch, Alara reached for his hand, yearning for even a small connection, but Kane pulled away instinctively, pretending to adjust his watch. "Sorry," he said with a chuckle. "Didn't realize you were reaching for me." Alara laughed it off, but inside, it stung. Something was changing, and she couldn't ignore it. She began noticing other little things, too. Kane had started dressing sharper, even on casual days, and he wore the cologne she'd given him for their anniversary, a scent he typically reserved for special occasions. When she asked why, he brushed it off with a grin. "Gotta stay sharp for the clients," he said with a wink. But who were these clients, and why hadn't he mentioned them before? The final straw came one Saturday morning. While tidying their shared office space, Alara found a receipt tucked under a stack of papers on Kane's desk. It was from an upscale cafe across town, a place they had never visited together. At first, she thought it might have been a business lunch, but her stomach twisted when she saw the date. It was the same day Kane had claimed he was stuck in meetings all afternoon. By now, the unease in her chest was impossible to ignore. She tried to rationalize it, reminding herself of all the good things in their relationship. Kane loved her. They were planning a wedding, building a future. But late at night, as she lay staring at the ceiling, doubts crept in. What if there was more to his behavior than stress? What if he wasn't being honest? Alara didn't want to believe it. She didn't want to become someone who doubted the man she loved. Yet, with every passing day, the distance between them grew, and her heart felt heavier. She poured herself into wedding preparations and her art, hoping that staying busy would quiet the questions swirling in her mind. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. Alara had always believed in love and trust in the magic of a connection that could endure a lifetime. But now, that trust was beginning to crack, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the man she was about to marry was slipping away from her. Worse, she had no idea how to bring him back. It was around this time that Alara first truly noticed Elle. Elle had moved into the neighborhood recently, and her striking presence had been impossible to miss. With her sleek black hair, piercing green eyes, and air of effortless confidence, she had a way of drawing attention wherever she went. She lived alone in the house next door, often seen tending to her vibrant garden or lounging on her porch with a book in hand. At first, Alara thought little of her. Elle was polite and friendly, always offering a smile or a casual wave. They'd even exchanged a few words about gardening tips and local coffee shops. Alara appreciated having a neighbor who seemed approachable. But lately, things had begun to feel different. It started subtly with small moments that Alara brushed off at first. Elle seemed to have an uncanny knack for appearing whenever Kane was outside. If he was unloading groceries, Elle would be walking her dog. If he was mowing the lawn, she'd be on her porch, waving and offering a cold drink. Alara wanted to believe it was just neighborly friendliness. But as the weeks passed, their interactions became more frequent and harder to ignore. One afternoon, Alara was working on a painting in her sunlit studio. She loved this space, a serene corner of the house filled with her sketches and brushes, where creativity flowed effortlessly. As she added soft strokes of blue to her canvas, she glanced out the window and froze. There, in the driveway, were Kane and Elle, standing close together and laughing. Their faces were lit with easy smiles, and Alara couldn't ignore how relaxed and comfortable they seemed. Elle tossed her hair over her shoulder, and Kane leaned in slightly, his posture engaged and open. Alara's brush hovered midair, her mind clouded with unease. When Kane came back inside, she tried to sound casual. "What were you and Elle talking about?" He shrugged, grabbing a water bottle from the fridge. "Oh, just neighbor stuff." She was asking about the renovations we did last year. Alara nodded, but the knot in her stomach tightened. Why was Elle suddenly so interested in their renovations? In the days that followed, Alara noticed more moments like this. One evening, as she walked back from the mailbox, she saw Kane and Elle standing by the fence that separated their yards. Elle was wearing a flowing sundress, her laughter carrying through the air like music. Kane, holding a garden rake, was clearly in the middle of yard work but didn't seem in any hurry to get back to it. Alara lingered for a moment, pretending to shuffle through the mail in her hands. She couldn't hear their conversation, but the way they leaned toward each other and the easy rhythm of their interaction made her stomach churn. When Kane came inside that night, Alara brought it up. "You and Elle seem to be talking a lot lately," she said, trying to keep her tone lighthearted. "She's just a friendly neighbor," Kane replied with a laugh. "You're not jealous, are you?" Alara forced a smile. "Of course not. Just curious." But the unease lingered. The following week, Alara had another unsettling encounter. She was pruning roses in the backyard when she heard voices on the other side of the fence. It was Kane and Elle again, their tones low and almost conspiratorial. "I owe you for this one," Kane said with a chuckle. "Don't worry," Elle replied. "I like helping out. You're easy to talk to." Alara froze, her hands gripping the shears tightly. She didn't want to eavesdrop, but something about their exchange made her chest tighten. That evening she confronted Kane. "What were you and Elle talking about?" she asked, trying to sound casual but failing to mask the tension in her voice. "She was just offering advice about the landscaping," he said with his signature charming smile. "That's all." But Alara wasn't convinced. Things came to a head at a neighborhood barbecue hosted by the Johnsons. Most of the neighbors had gathered in their backyard, chatting over grilled burgers and potato salad. Kane was his usual charismatic self, moving through the crowd with ease. But Alara noticed his gaze kept drifting toward the corner of the yard, where Elle was sitting. At one point, Elle beckoned him over. Kane hesitated for a moment before walking toward her. They stood off to the side, laughing softly, their heads close together. Alara tried to focus on her conversation with Mrs. Harper, but her eyes kept wandering back to them. Her heart sank as she noticed how Kane's smile seemed brighter with Elle, how his laughter sounded more genuine. When they got home that evening, Alara couldn't hold it in any longer. "Why do you keep talking to Elle?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Kane looked surprised. "What do you mean? She's our neighbor." "I mean, you seem to talk to her more than you talk to me," Alara said, trying to keep her emotions in check. Kane sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Alara, you're overthinking this. Elle is just a neighbor. There's nothing going on." But the way he avoided her gaze made Alara's stomach twist. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind raced with questions. Was she being paranoid, or was there something more to Kane's connection with Elle? The more she thought about it, the harder it became to dismiss the sinking feeling in her chest. Alara tried to dismiss her growing unease, but the nagging doubt refused to fade. Something wasn't right, and she could no longer ignore it. It was a quiet Friday evening when her world began to unravel. She had spent the day immersed in wedding preparations, carefully tying ribbons and arranging flowers in perfect rows. Kane had called earlier, saying he would be home late again, claiming a last-minute client meeting that couldn't wait. At first, Alara believed him. She told herself to stop overthinking and focus on the excitement of their upcoming wedding. But deep down, her unease was growing. His late nights, the secretive phone calls, and the way he seemed drawn to Elle, all of it piled up like puzzle pieces she didn't want to put together. By 8 p.m., needing a break, she stepped outside for some fresh air. The cool night breeze brushed against her skin as she wandered into their backyard. She stood by the rose bushes, staring at the soft glow of the moon, trying to quiet her restless mind. That's when she heard it, faint voices drifting over the fence from Elle's backyard. Alara froze, her heart pounding. She recognized one of the voices immediately. It was Kane. She crept closer to the fence, crouching low to stay out of sight. Her breath caught in her throat as she strained to hear their conversation. "This is getting harder to hide," Elle's voice murmured, soft but clear. "I know," Kane replied, his tone low and serious. "But we can't stop now. Not yet." Alara's chest tightened. What were they talking about? Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the fence, her heart pounding louder than the voices. "I hate sneaking around like this," Elle said after a pause. "She's so kind. She doesn't deserve this." Kane sighed heavily. "I didn't plan for it to happen this way. But what we have, it's real, Elle. I can't let it go." Alara's world spun. Her legs felt weak, and she steadied herself against the fence to keep from falling. The words echoed in her mind, cutting through her like shards of glass. It's real. She doesn't deserve this. The warmth of the living room felt cold now. The decorations she had so lovingly created mocked her with their perfection. She sank onto the couch, her head in her hands, replaying the conversation over and over. The man she was about to marry, the man she trusted with her heart, had been lying to her. And Elle, the friendly neighbor she once admired, was part of it. Tears blurred her vision, but she stayed silent, biting her lip to suppress a sob. She wanted to storm into Elle's yard and demand answers, but something held her back. A fragile part of her still hoped there was another explanation. When the voices continued, she realized she couldn't listen any longer. Turning away, she stumbled back toward the house, her steps shaky and uneven. For the rest of the night, Alara couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. Had it been going on from the beginning? Had she been blind to the signs? By morning, she was determined to uncover the full truth. She felt guilty even thinking about snooping, but she couldn't confront Kane without proof. When Kane left for a quick meeting, she picked up his spare charger from the kitchen counter and noticed his phone lighting up with a notification. It was from Elle. Last night was worth the risk. Alara's hands shook as she put the phone down. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and her mind raced. It felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Desperate for more clarity, she checked the drawer in his office where he kept receipts and notes. Among the usual paperwork, she found a folded slip of paper. It was a receipt from the same cafe she had noticed weeks ago, but this time, the date was even more recent. Just 2 days earlier. She sat down, the receipt in one hand and Elle's text vivid in her mind. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and the picture they formed was devastating. The man she loved, the man she thought she knew, was betraying her in the worst possible way. By the time Kane came home that evening, Alara had made up her mind. She wasn't going to sit in silence anymore. She wasn't going to let him lie to her face while carrying on a secret relationship with someone who had pretended to be her friend. When he walked through the door, his usual smile faltered at the sight of her standing there, arms crossed, her eyes red but fierce. "Alara," he said hesitantly. "What's wrong?" She held up the receipt and met his gaze head-on. "I know, Kane," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "I know about Elle. I heard you last night." His face paled. For the first time, he couldn't find the words to explain himself. Tears streamed down Alara's face, but she didn't wipe them away. "You looked me in the eye and promised me forever," she said, her voice breaking. "But the whole time, you were building a future with her." Kane opened his mouth to respond, but nothing he could say would undo the damage. In that moment, Alara realized the future she had dreamed of with him was gone. It wasn't her fault, and it wasn't something she could fix, but it was something she could walk away from. Her trust was shattered, but her strength was just beginning to take shape. The truth about Kane and Elle was too big, too heavy to carry alone. Alara knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. Alara refused to let their betrayal destroy her completely. The moment to confront them came sooner than she expected. That weekend, the Johnsons were hosting a neighborhood barbecue, and everyone was invited, including Elle and Kane. At first, Alara considered skipping it. The idea of facing them both, pretending everything was fine, felt unbearable. But as she stared at the invitation pinned to her fridge, she realized this was her chance to take back control. She would confront them, not behind closed doors where lies could twist the truth, but in front of the people who had supported her and Kane's relationship all along. The day of the barbecue was sunny and warm, filled with the smell of grilled burgers and the sound of children's laughter. Alara arrived alone, carrying a plate of cookies she had barely managed to bake that morning. Her hands trembled slightly as she stepped into the Johnsons' backyard, but she kept her head high. "He'll be here soon," Alara replied, forcing a smile. Her heart pounded, knowing the storm she was about to unleash. It didn't take long for Kane to show up, his usual confident demeanor on full display. He greeted everyone with his signature charm, shaking hands and laughing as if nothing was wrong. Elle arrived shortly after, wearing a sundress and carrying a bowl of potato salad. She waved at Alara, her smile seemingly innocent, but it only made Alara's stomach churn. Alara walked toward them, her heart racing. Every step felt heavier than the last, but she refused to back down. She deserved answers. "Kane!" she said sharply, her voice cutting through their conversation. Both Kane and Elle turned to her, their faces registering surprise and, in Les' case, a flicker of guilt. "Alara," Kane said, his tone a little too smooth. "I didn't know you were here already." Elle's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't say anything. Kane glanced around nervously, noticing that a few neighbors had started to watch. "Alara," he began, lowering his voice, "maybe we should do this somewhere private." "No," Alara said firmly. "We're doing this here. Everyone here has seen us as the perfect couple, but they deserve to know the truth. I deserve to say it." The yard grew quiet as conversations stopped, and all eyes turned toward the three of them. "I know about you two," Alara said, her voice trembling, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I heard you. I saw the messages. I've pieced it all together." Kane's face paled, and Elle looked like she wanted to disappear. "How long has this been going on?" Alara demanded, her eyes burning with anger and betrayal. "How long have you been sneaking around behind my back while pretending to love me?" "Alara, it's not what you think." Kane started, his voice weak. But she cut him off. "Don't lie to me, Kane." "Not here. Not anymore." Alara finally spoke, her voice shaking. "Alara, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." Alara turned to her, her glare piercing. "You didn't just hurt me, Elle. You betrayed me. You acted like my friend while stealing the life I thought I was building." Elle opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Alara felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she turned back to Kane. "You made me believe in us," she said, her voice breaking. "You made me think we were building a future together. But it was all a lie." The silence in the yard was deafening. Alara could feel the weight of everyone's stares. But instead of feeling small, she felt stronger. This was her moment to reclaim her power. "I won't let you or this betrayal define me," she continued, her voice steady now. "The wedding is off. You can have each other if that's what you want, but I'm done with this." She turned and walked away, her head held high. She didn't stop to look at the faces around her, didn't pause to see Kane's reaction. She didn't need to. This moment wasn't for him. It was for her. Back home, Alara sat on her couch, letting the emotions of the day wash over her. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but so was a new sense of clarity. Over the next few weeks, she focused on herself, pouring her energy into painting, journaling, and reconnecting with old friends. She redecorated her home, clearing out anything that reminded her of Kane and filling the space with things that brought her joy. Slowly, the sadness began to lift, replaced by a quiet strength. Alara realized she didn't need Kane or anyone else to complete her. She was enough on her own. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. A real, genuine smile. She was finally free. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and once broken, it reveals the importance of self-worth and inner strength. True resilience lies in recognizing betrayal, letting go of what no longer serves you, and rediscovering your own power to build a future on your terms.